A confident black woman stepped out of the elevator into the grand, glass-paneled lobby of a prestigious corporate skyscraper. Her heels clicked with precision against the marble floor, each step deliberate, echoing her quiet resolve. She wore a tailored navy blue suit that complemented her rich skin tone, and her natural hair was styled in a sleek twist-out that framed her face elegantly. In one hand, she held a leather-bound portfolio, and in the other, a slim, professional handbag. Her expression was composed, eyes focused, but behind her calm exterior was a fire, a lifetime of preparing for this moment. She approached the front desk, greeted the receptionist with a warm, "Good morning," only to be met with a cursory glance and a cold tone. "Name?" the woman asked flatly, not looking up. After providing her information, the receptionist hesitated, then gestured vaguely toward a waiting area, barely acknowledging her presence. As she walked to the designated spot, she could feel eyes on her, judging, scanning, doubting. She took a seat near a glass coffee table stacked with magazines featuring smiling, mostly white executives on the covers. Around her, a few sharply dressed employees passed by, throwing quick, curious glances her way. Two junior staffers nearby exchanged whispers and chuckles. "She must be here for HR," one murmured. The other smirked, "Definitely not here for a top-level position." The woman heard every word, but she kept her back straight, her chin high. She didn't flinch, because she knew exactly why she was here, and exactly who she was. As the woman sat patiently in the waiting area, her eyes scanned the modern, minimalistic design of the office, glass walls, chrome accents, and an atmosphere thick with corporate ambition. She crossed her legs, checked the time on her watch, and exhaled softly. Just then, two employees, young, sharply dressed men in fitted suits, emerged from a nearby hallway. One glanced at her, leaned in toward the other, and they both began whispering, not realizing, or not caring, that their voices still carried. "You see her?" one of them said with a smirk. "What's she doing here dressed like that? She must be lost." The other snickered, "Yeah, maybe she's here to drop off a resume for a secretary position. Or janitorial. Not executive, come on." Their laughter, quiet but cruel, settled into the room like smoke. The woman didn't move, but her fingers briefly tightened around the handle of her portfolio. She had heard comments like this before, masked as jokes, coded in superiority, rooted in ignorance. But she'd learned long ago that reacting emotionally gave them power. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and uncrossed her legs, exuding the calm dignity of someone who refused to be reduced. One of the men made a show of checking his watch. "Hope she's not wasting anyone's time in there," he muttered. Still, she said nothing. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was restraint. She had walked through too many doors that were never meant to open for her to let this moment rattle her. She looked ahead, back straight, her face unreadable. She wasn't just waiting for an interview. She was waiting to change the room. They just didn't know it yet. A tall man in a gray suit finally emerged from the frosted glass doors, clipboard in hand. He barely made eye contact as he called her name, mispronouncing it slightly. She stood with grace, correcting him gently but clearly. He didn't acknowledge the correction, just turned and walked ahead, expecting her to follow. As she entered the interview room, a chill seemed to settle in the air. The space was spacious and sleek, with a long glass table at the center. 3 people sat on the other side, 2 men and 1 woman, all wearing expressions that ranged from disinterest to barely concealed skepticism. None of them stood to greet her. Instead, one of the men, seated in the middle and wearing a designer tie, leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "You're here for the executive strategy position?" he asked, brows lifted as if the idea itself was absurd. "Yes," she replied with calm confidence, offering a firm handshake one by one. 2 of them hesitated before taking her hand, the third didn't at all, pretending to be preoccupied with papers. The woman on the panel gave a tight smile. "You've got an interesting background. Not what we typically see in applicants for this role." The other man added, "Are you sure you're in the right room?" She met his gaze without blinking. "Yes, I am." There was a short, awkward silence. Then one of them gestured lazily to a chair at the far end of the table, placing physical distance between her and the panel. As she sat, she noted their body language, crossed arms, raised brows, quick glances at one another, as if silently asking, who let her in here? But she didn't shrink. She didn't stutter. She placed her portfolio on the table, folded her hands, and waited. They thought they were about to interview a mistake. But they were about to meet a storm. The questions began almost immediately, rapid fire and loaded with condescension. One of the panelists, a younger man with slicked back hair and a smug smile, leaned forward with a patronizing tone. "Tell us, what exactly makes you think you're qualified for this role? Our firm handles billion-dollar strategies. That's a bit above the scope of your last position, don't you think?" Without missing a beat, she opened her portfolio and slid forward a single, crisp page, a brief outline of a restructuring plan she had implemented at her previous company. This initiative led to a 28% increase in operational efficiency and saved the company over $14 million in its first year, she said evenly. It was picked up by Forbes and modeled by 2 other firms in the region. The panelists glanced at the paper but didn't reach for it. The woman on the panel raised an eyebrow. "Impressive, though the scale is different. This is a much larger ecosystem. And strategy," the woman replied smoothly, "scales with insight, not ego." A silence followed, brimming with tension. One panelist cleared his throat and asked a deliberately complex question about market disruption and AI adaptation strategies. She answered with sharp clarity, outlining 3 phases of implementation that reflected both technical understanding and leadership foresight. Still, they interrupted her repeatedly. They cut her off mid-sentence, reframed her answers as ambitious, and one even chuckled under his breath when she mentioned leading a cross-cultural team. But she stayed poised. Her voice never wavered. Her words struck with precision. They tried to make her feel small, but the more they challenged her, the more it became evident they were out of their depth. And she was far more than they had expected. Just as the room settled into a brief, uneasy silence after her last response, the door to the interview room swung open with a quiet creak. All 3 panelists turned their heads quickly, straightening slightly in their seats. A man stepped in, tall, silver-haired, with a presence that filled the room before he even spoke. He wore a navy suit that seemed to command respect without effort. The room's energy shifted instantly. The panelists, once dismissive and dominant, suddenly looked like schoolchildren being caught mid-mischief. The woman seated at the end of the table didn't turn around. She already knew who it was. She didn't need to see him to feel the shift. She recognized the sudden hush, the reverence. This wasn't just anyone. It was the CEO. He paused in the doorway, scanning the room. His eyes landed on her, and something in his expression softened. Recognition flashed, followed quickly by a quiet awe. The panelists stood awkwardly, each offering rushed greetings, but he ignored them. His focus remained solely on her. Then he did something that made everyone freeze. He stepped toward her, not briskly, not with authority, but with deep respect. And when he reached her, he offered a warm smile, and bowed. Not deeply, but just enough to make a statement that words could never carry. "Welcome," he said gently. "We're honored you're here." The panelists blinked, their mouths slightly open, confusion and panic creeping across their faces. One of them stammered, "Sir, I wasn't aware." "You weren't," the CEO cut in, still smiling at her. "Because you weren't meant to be interviewing her. You were supposed to be preparing to report to her." He turned to the group fully now. "This is the new chairwoman of our board. Effective today." The silence that followed was deafening. The silence in the room was thick, almost suffocating. No one moved. The panelists looked at each other, faces pale, their previous smugness dissolving into disbelief and dread. The woman they had belittled, questioned, and dismissed was not just a candidate. She was the new chairwoman, their superior. The CEO turned to her once more and extended his hand with genuine warmth. "Would you like to say a few words, Chairwoman?" he asked, stepping aside as if the entire room now belonged to her. She stood slowly, gracefully, her presence even more commanding now. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply looked each panelist in the eye, her gaze calm and penetrating. The man who had mocked her credentials shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The woman who had questioned her background looked down at the table, lips pressed into a thin line. And the third, the one who chuckled when she mentioned leading diverse teams, now sat with his hands folded tightly, the color draining from his face. "I came into this room prepared to prove myself," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I thought I was here to be evaluated. Instead, I was being underestimated. Judged not by my work, but by your assumptions. No one spoke. She continued, "What you didn't know is that I've already advised international boards, led crisis turnarounds in 3 industries, and built strategic plans that your competitors now envy. You thought I didn't belong in this room, when in fact, I'm the one now leading it." The words hung in the air, firm but never bitter. She wasn't here to humiliate them, she didn't need to. Their discomfort was doing all the work. The CEO nodded in approval beside her. "Let this serve as a lesson. Talent doesn't always come in the package you expect, but it always speaks for itself." And with that, the balance of power shifted completely. The chairwoman turned and took a slow, deliberate step toward the head of the table. The same chair they had gestured toward earlier, away from them, removed from the center, was now irrelevant. A new seat had been pulled out at the very head of the table, directly in front of the panel, the position of power and leadership. She didn't hesitate. She walked to it and sat, her posture dignified, her presence magnetic. The 3 interviewers remained standing, unsure of whether to sit or speak. The CEO gave them a look, a quiet cue to take their seats. They obeyed, slowly lowering themselves like scolded children, trying to look composed but unable to hide their discomfort. Their confidence was gone, their rehearsed superiority shattered. She placed her portfolio back on the table and folded her hands over it, eyes calmly scanning the panel. The silence between them was now loaded with a new kind of tension, the kind that comes when you realize you've underestimated the wrong person. "I'd like to hear from each of you," she said, voice cool but even. "Tell me what you think this company needs most in its leadership right now, and what you've done personally to deliver it." Her tone wasn't angry, but it left no room for excuses. The panelists hesitated, stumbling over their words. The woman on the end spoke first, her voice noticeably more respectful than before. She mentioned innovation, adaptability. The man next to her added something vague about vision and growth. The third, the one who had questioned if she was in the right room, barely looked up as he gave his answer. She listened carefully to each one. No interruptions. No judgment on her face. Just observation. She was no longer the one being tested. She was now the one measuring their worth. And they all knew it. Later that afternoon, the atmosphere in the office was transformed. Word had spread like wildfire. The woman everyone had whispered about, dismissed, and mocked was not a job candidate, she was the new chairwoman of the board. The same woman who sat alone in the waiting area that morning was now the most powerful figure in the building. As she walked through the halls, employees stopped what they were doing. Conversations quieted. Heads turned. Some looked stunned, others ashamed. A few offered tight, apologetic smiles. The whispers had changed from mockery to awe, and from disbelief to admiration. But she didn't gloat. She walked with the same poise she had carried all day, heels clicking in steady rhythm, eyes forward, the quiet strength of someone who had spent her whole life preparing for this moment. She passed by the front desk, the same one where she'd been treated with indifference. The receptionist stood as she approached, eyes wide, mouth opening slightly to speak, perhaps to apologize. But the chairwoman simply nodded, her expression unreadable but not unkind, and kept walking. When she entered the executive suite, a senior assistant quickly opened the boardroom doors for her. Inside, the long table gleamed under soft lighting, the room already arranged for her first official meeting. Her name was on the door. A gold nameplate, Chairwoman A. Davis. She walked to the head of the table, pulled out her chair, the real one this time, and sat down slowly. From here, the view was different. She could see the entire room, the skyline beyond the windows, and the weight of what she now represented. Not just power, but change. This wasn't just a seat. It was a statement. And she had earned every inch of it.